about as likely to slap each other, punch each other, hit each other with an object, stab each other with a knife, shoot each other with a gun, and kill each other, although the kill each other is far more complex than one to dissect, and I'll explain why later if you wish. But the domestic violence in the home is very much a two-way street. Almost all of the studies of domestic violence, as opposed to the crime studies, if you ask a man in a crime study, have you been subject to violence by your wife, men will answer less frequently yes. But in a study where you ask the same question of both men and women are more likely to say, I initiated the violence against my husband. That is, I hit him first, I scratched him first, I punched him first, or whatever. And there's 7 levels of violence that are usually measured with the good studies, and women are more likely to initiate on each of those levels of violence. But no one knows this until they ask the men directly. And so when the first study by Strauss and Gellas came out with this in the 70s, and including asking women whether they were the ones that were the initiators, and found that more women said, yes, I was the first one to do the hitting, none of the feminists believed that, and so a number of the feminists set out to do studies asking the same types of questions, or in their own style. To their credit, as I said, they pretty much all found some version of the same thing, that either domestic violence was about equal female to male and vice versa, or alternatively, it was more female to male than male to female. The important thing there is that the Violence Against Women Act does not acknowledge that. The people who are taken care of are the women who are victims, not the men who are victims. And this actually ends up hurting women. It hurts women because, let's say you're a man and woman in the house, and you are in a big fight, and you feel the other person is dangerous to you or harmful to you, and you would like to be able to go to a domestic violence shelter rather than spend that night in the house, or some type of shelter. Well, there is shelters everywhere, not everywhere, but there are thousands of shelters in the United States for women, and only 1 or 2 shelters that even allow men to be able to register and get refuge there. Now, that's unfair to women. Women shouldn't have to be the ones to have to leave necessarily. There should be at least shelters for men and shelters to women that allow both of them to be able to escape the home for the night and until there's ability to reconcile in a more positive type of way, until both sexes are required to go to couples communication counseling and anger management training, and know how to communicate with each other in such a way that helps each of them to be understood. I teach couples communication workshops all around the country, and one of the things that I know is that part of what I teach people to do is that when their partner is angry or upset, to be able to not do what we are programmed to do as human beings, which is to respond to somebody that's upset with us by arguing back with them, but rather than hearing that person out. If you're my brother and you argue with me and you say, your dad always preferred you, Warren, to me, and I just go, oh, he preferred you, remember the birthday party he gave for you, he never gave a birthday party to me like that, and you don't feel heard, the chances are you'll get more and more upset, and maybe you'll hit me because you're not feeling heard. But if I said, oh my God, Jeff, that must have felt terrible, you must have felt really hurt and unwanted, and that probably also happened when I graduated from high school and he gave me a big party, and you graduated from high school and only gave you a small party. That must have really been bothersome too. So if I'm picking up what you're saying, hearing what you're saying, and then sharing something else that even proves to a greater degree that I'm hearing what you're saying, like this not only happened in the one time that you're pointing out, but it also happened some other time, you must feel terrible about that. Well, you're not going to hit me in response to that. You're going to sort of say, wow, thank you. Probably come over and hug me and say, I just feel so, cry and feel so understood. That's the response. If we want to have a domestic violence prevention act and help people communicate more effectively so that being heard by their partner almost never leads to violence. Not being heard by your partner can lead to violence, especially when somebody really loves you. The more you love somebody, the more vulnerable you feel. The more vulnerable you feel, the more painful their upsetness or criticism of you feels, Therefore, the more likely you are to become defensive. Anger is vulnerability's mask. And our job, if we're going to do a good job to prevent domestic violence, is to teach all of us from first and second grade on how to hear things that are critical of us, how to hear anger in such a way that helps the person who is angry understand that we feel their vulnerability and are there with them during this period of vulnerability so that they can move through it out of their vulnerability without becoming frustrated and more angry. That's what a violence against women act should be. A violence against, a prevention of violence against anyone. And that should be taught both in first and second grade, and it should be available for government, with government subsidy, to every parent that wishes to enroll.
Dr. Farrell, there's a video of feminist men and women protesting at a University of Toronto event that you were speaking at, and I was wondering why there was so much anger directed at you. Would you please talk about the criticisms, rational or not, being articulated against you? It's interesting now that there isn't a men's counterpart to the feminist movement that would, for example, protest female teachers having sex with male students and shouting rapist at them.
Yes, it is really very, very sad. I think what's happened for someone that didn't pick this up from the beginning of the interview, I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City for a number of years and spoke all around the world as I think probably the world's leading male feminist. So I'm a very strong supporter of feminist issues in many respects. But we made a mistake as feminists, and one of our mistakes was that we evolved as feminists through the civil rights movement where there were oppressors and oppressed, and then the Marxist movement where there were people who earned more money were oppressors, and the ones that earned less were oppressed. And so we took that model into the feminist movement, and because men earned more, as I said before, because dads earned more actually, we sort of assumed that men were the oppressors and that they made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And so that attitude has been with us. And so when I wrote The Myth of Male Power, and I explained really that male power is a paradox, that on the one hand there is such a thing as male power, that is a person above you at work and does have some power over you. But on the other hand, the pressure on men to have to climb the ladder to the top in order to be seen as lovable as a man, or to risk their lives in war and be disposable. You may, at war, risk your life more and become a general faster than a woman becomes a general. We in the women's movement said, okay, there's more generals that are men than women. This must be discrimination against women. But in fact, it was discrimination against men being expected and pressured and required to be in each generation's war. We missed completely the fact that the way we defined being a good man in every generation's war was for a manhood to be equivalent to being disposable. So the anger of feminists who assumed that there was only one way of looking at power, that it was men who had climbed to that top of the ladder, they didn't see the powerlessness in the expectation and pressure to do that. They didn't see the powerlessness in the fact that when a man and a woman have a child, that the woman oftentimes has three options. Option one is raise children. Option two is raise money. Option three is doing some combination of both. Whereas the male who has children, he's often expected he has three options too. Option one is to raise money. Option two is to raise money. And option three is to raise money. And when I said things like that, it was like, wait a minute, this powerful group Warren is saying is not the oppressor, writing books with the title like The Myth of Male Power, the nerve of that. And so even before I did my presentation on the boy crisis, which was the first major presentation I did on the boy crisis years before the book came out, I did that at the University of Toronto. Some feminist professor read a paragraph or two from the book, and that led the Socialist Worker Party feminists in Toronto to organize against me. The Toronto campus police had to come out to stop the feminists who were giving the finger to the police and shouting in their face. But fortunately, somebody filmed that protest, who said that, that the police were treating them brutally. It was very clear that they were treating the police quite amazingly disrespectfully. And it's all one has to do is look at the video to see that the feminists were so strongly shouting down the campus police, that the campus police, who were not allowed to touch the students, could not respond fully, and so they had to call the city police, who finally took the body block that the students were doing, or some of the students, the Socialist Worker Party feminists were doing, and they said that that protesting was fine, but using 50 students to prevent people from going in to hear my presentation on the boy crisis, that was not okay. And so the very fact that they wanted the students, the feminists, to undo the body block caused outrage among the feminists.
Dr. Farrell, you were the guest of honor speaking in Staten Island this spring about the creation of the Council on Boys and Men, addressing the many risk factors to American males. Would you please talk about that effort, and why aren't there politically powerful groups lobbying Congress on behalf of boys?
Yes, the deepest reason why there aren't a lot of groups lobbying Congress for and understanding boys is that, historically speaking and biologically speaking, we have trained boys to be disposable. And when you train a group of people to be disposable and your survival is dependent upon that, it is very difficult for you to psychologically attach and be close to the children, to the people who are saving your life. And so that's the underlying reason. That's the biological heritage of why we don't care as much about boys and men as we do about girls and women, and also we don't care as much about boys and men as we do about girls and women, because in order to be disposable, you have to keep your feelings to yourself. You have to do what you have to do when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. And so when people who don't express their vulnerability, who don't cry, who don't ask for help, don't get our empathy as much. And so that's the underlying reason why we don't care as much about boys and men. But fortunately, an exception to that rule happened when a fellow named James Otto was in the Cayman Islands with his wife in Staten Island. He's from Staten Island, and he read the Boy Crisis book, which is a stupid thing to do when you're on vacation. But anyway, he did it. And he wrote me saying how upset he was. But then he signed it that he was the borough president of Staten Island, and he said, "Is there anything I can do?" And I said, "Yes, there's something you can do. Do you think you can persuade your fellow council people to create a Staten Island Council on Boys and Men?" I am trying to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, making good progress actually in that area. But at any rate, so he said yes, he would check, and he said, "My goodness, they do agree." And so I then flew out there and spoke with him to help create a Staten Island Council on Boys and Men, and now continuing to work with him to make that a reality. And you and I met at that presentation where I sort of gave a little bit of an overview of what the need for a Council on Boys and Men is. And it turns out that this is the first active government entity focused on boys and men's issues, even though we have thousands of them focused on girls and women's issues.
It was a poignant moment there, like almost creating sacred space during that press conference. It was really something.
By the way, that press conference is on my YouTube channel, so if you're interested in, I felt that sacred space feeling also, and it's really a very powerful statement that you made, because there was in the room the vibration of feeling like this is an amazing thing, that A, this hasn't happened in the past, and B, we here in Staten Island are making this happen now. And that was sort of almost a spiritual feeling that I felt in the room. Is that what you were referring to also?
Definitely. People were really moved by the work of Staten Island Borough President James Otto for what he had done, and then bringing you there to speak in detail of a crisis people know, but here it is being articulated.
Yes, I was very, very touched by that. And it's so, when you write a book and you discover what you discover in writing The Boy Crisis, it's upsetting if it remains just as a book, because then it's just, fine, academically somebody discovered this, but to see nothing being done about it. If you have a heart, you want something done, because ultimately we all want what's best best for our sons, and there's no, and when a boy doesn't grow up well, that then we don't have a boy who our daughters who are worthy of our daughters' love.
Dr. Warren Farrell, author of The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. It's also co-authored with Dr. John Gray. This book is an invaluable compendium to lead parents, educators, politicians in the right direction toward ending the war against dad deprivation, but also revitalizing the role of men in a non-traditional job, and something we didn't get to, but providing the necessary steps to heal the ADHD epidemic. Thank you again for being on In Other News.
It's just wonderful talking to you. You do your homework so well. You ask such good questions, and you listen so carefully, and then follow up with intelligent questions with a wonderful segue. So it's be happy to do an interview with you anytime.
Excellent. All right. Thank you again, Dr. Farrell.
You're very welcome. It's a real pleasure.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
That's going to do it for In Other News. I'm Jeff Brady. Visit inothernewsradio.com for archives and more information about the guests.
One of WBAI's most listened to program hosts, Dr. Gary Null, is doing another fundraiser for WBAI Radio. He will premiere his new film, Deadly Deception.
And this is a hard-hitting documentary. And everyone who's interested in the truth about the deep state and vaccines and big pharma and the corruption of CDC, it's all documented.
And Gary will be in conversation with another WBAI host, Leonard Locate.
And I said, I'll only speak with Leonard if you ask me hard questions. I don't like softball questions.